established life beyond civilization. Eerie.
The weird and the eerie.
What we see and what we seem are but a dream within a dream. You must learn to love someone else apart from me, Sarah. I won't be here much longer.
Good morning, girls.
Good morning, Mrs. Applejack.
Well, young ladies, we are indeed fortunate in the weather for our picnic to Hanging Rock. I have instructed Mademoiselle that as the day is likely to be warm, you may remove your gloves once the drag has passed through Wood End. You will partake of luncheon at the picnic grounds near the rock. Once again, let me remind you, the rock itself is extremely dangerous, and you are therefore forbidden any tomboy foolishness in the matter of exploration, even on the lower slopes.
Alright, we're back for our final episode of Season 3. The Eerieness remains. Joan Lindsey. We are Lost Futures, a Mark Fisher podcast, and I'm Steve.
And I'm Marlowe.
And today we're talking about Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsey.
Yep.
Yeah, so we just played the trailer for the 1975 Peter Weir film adaptation. But first we're going to look at what Mark Fisher says about this and why we're talking about it.
Okay, so Picnic at Hanging Rock is a story about a girls' school in 1900 Australia. They have a picnic at a geologic feature called Hanging Rock. During said picnic, 3 of the students and 1 of the teachers disappears without a trace. And the story essentially follows the school in the aftermath of that. You know, spoilers, they find 1 of the girls, but no one else, and no one who witnessed anything has any memories of anything. It's unclear whether it's supernatural or, you know, perhaps just a murder or something else. But yeah, it basically shows the breakdown of this school, its headmistress, the effects it has on the other girls in the wake of this event.
And the way people that work at the school start quitting. They try to leave. One, goes away, and then I think they go to Sydney, and then their apartment burns down, and that ends one of the chapters. In the later chapters, horrible things start to happen.
Yeah, the headmistress ends up killing herself after her school closes because all the parents pull all their kids out. Yeah, and it's basically just this open-ended mystery. It's also, I think, notable that the book is really couched in this sort of meta-realism where it has an introduction that's it's for you to decide if this is a true story, and the last chapter is just a clipping from a newspaper about the aftermath. It has a lot of supposed inserts from media or statements people gave to the police and stuff to kind of give this impression that this book may have happened. And famously, people in the 60s when this book just came out were not sure whether it really happened or not. That was one of the enduring mysteries and urban legends surrounding it.
Well, she starts out with a foreword that very much leaves it up to the reader to decide whether or not it's fact or fiction.
Right, and ends with a newspaper clipping as well.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing Veerhaven take a crack at this one. I mean, I was saying that it would be an interesting angle to lean into that more for an adaptation and, like, go about it, like, framing it, like, through kind of clipped together media or something like that would be a different, interesting way of telling the story. But anyway.
Here's the intro to the book. Whether Picnic at Hanging Rock is fact or fiction, my readers must decide for themselves. As the fateful picnic took place in the year 1900 and all the characters who appear in this book are long since dead, it hardly seems important. A couple other things about the creation of the book. Joan Lindsey claimed to have basically written it in a dream, or it was writing down and transcribing a dream she had while she was living in Mulberry Hill. And so she kept having this dream that was happening subsequently, that she was just, the whole book was given to her in a dream. And it reminds me of, like, William Blake getting, the visions of something and then being forced to make an engraving of a vision he has.
Yeah, or alternatively, that she wrote it every 2 weeks kind of reminds me of Kerouac.
Yeah, a very manic or speedy thing.
Getting into Fisher's early thoughts, he's contrasting it initially with M.R. James.
Yep.
Whereas M.R. James has a failure of absence, a thing, i.e. a ghost, that is there but ought not to be. This is a failure of presence. It is no girls where there ought be girls, I suppose.
Or there's no agency to the rock or the pseudo-spiritual thing that makes the disappearance happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but there's also just they literally disappeared without a trace. There's no evidence of where they went, etc., etc. M.R. James famously somewhat conservative. His stories are often seen in this almost Lovecraftian vein of being this warning about wandering too far from the beaten path, whereas this almost has an ambiguous optimism towards that, or at the very least, while it's probably bad these girls disappeared without a trace, the school also sucked.
Yeah, we haven't talked about the school. By the way, this all takes place in Australia, the Australian bush, and they're all English girls who are transplants or colonial subjects within the British Empire being sent here from rich families.
Yeah, I mean, or they're at least
families.
Aristocratic Australians that, the families are trying to maintain this Victorian sensibility of, genteelness, of sending your girls to finishing school, and I mean, that's basically what kind of thing it is.
I think there's one family one of the missing girls who was in India. Mm-hmm. And that kind of speaks to the way the British Empire kind of used this colonies to just send rich girls off to.
Yeah, or I mean, your wealthy families would go to other colonies and make their, money selling cotton or whatever the hell they did. I guess Australia was gold mining or something. But yeah, so the school kind of is depicted as this definite negative in all of it, somewhat oppressive.
It's extremely abusive.
Yeah, abusive, oppressive, and also unable and unprepared to handle this.
Miss Appleyard is horrible to all the students and just uses them to take out her abusive tendencies on. She regularly hits them or seems to be in that kind of old school disciplinary structure. And she's also depicted as an alcoholic. There's constant references to her drinking
brandy
in her office by herself. And that gets progressively worse and worse as the book goes along. When the tragedy doesn't resolve itself, she's seen more and more drinking from the brandy.
I mean, the whole thing is a lot of layers of facade, and she has this certain facade of this genteel aristocratic woman, but as soon as the school collapses, it's seeming like she has nothing.
Yeah.
And she almost is using being a headmistress at this high-class school as kind of her in to perform as aristocracy, while, you know, it's a house of cards, and as soon as something comes up that the systems of the school and she is unable to solve, everything falls apart, I think is definitely a thing that sort of occurs. And it also has this colonial aspect, this man versus nature wild aspect of we're trying to insert this very quirky, historically contingent set of hierarchies that arise from like late 18, early 1900s England onto this land that has no need for it.
And the land rejects them.
Right. And I think there's a fair interpretation that the girls reject it as well, and the girls, depending on your interpretation of what happened, and I think we'll get into the different interpretations, but I think there's a strong idea that the girls themselves sort of made the choice to walk away from this bullshit in a lot of ways.
What I really appreciate, and maybe he gets this from Jameson, but he is very focused on architecture and how it's described through a lot of these. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking a lot of Lovecraft, but in these later chapters, the way he describes interstellar and the fifth dimensions as these labyrinthian, or in Lovecraft is cyclopean structures. And here once again we get this attention to the maze, and once again he's using the labyrinthian. The disappearance at the heart of the novel happens on a Valentine's Day picnic at Hanging Rock in Victoria, England. Hanging Rock broods over the novel like one of Oscar Dominguez's or Max Ernst's decalcomania spinal landscapes. It is a geological relic from deep time, a time that precedes the arrival of human beings by many millennia. It can only be seen in fragments. Its labyrinthian spaces as intensively treacherous as those of another alien picnic site, Tarkovsky's Zone. So I think here we have like so many things from the eerie section being put in this, along with some Lovecraft too.
The important ideas going for Tarkovsky's Zone. You know, this isn't about the why you should stay within the cloistered walls of Appleyard Academy and never venture out. There's a certain transcendence, there's a certain optimism.
Yeah.
Ambiguous optimism, but a certain optimism that...
An enjoyment, a jouissance that's been repressed by these institutions.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, in a lot of ways, it's almost, it almost makes me think of this as, like, kind of a anti-Lovecraft in the idea that the giant cyclopean monoliths and like labyrinthian crevasses are the normal, and it's this like silly little school built in this like Georgian mansion style that's the weird thing that doesn't belong, kind of.
Yeah, and there's freedom that comes with being lost out in the woods. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of Atwood as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in this, and particularly when we get to the quote-unquote chapter 18, that kind of reminds me of Atwood.
Yeah, like return to nature and that acting as an emancipation of the spirit.
Right. I think that is definitely a teased out theme throughout the book that seemingly the author wanted to make a little more explicit, but yeah.
We played the trailer, but Fisher goes into why this movie is such a great rendition, and here's Patton Oswalt, Millennial Hero, talking about it.
Picnic at Hanging Rock is most eerie, unsettling film. These schoolgirls at turn of the century, Australian outback, trying to be very proper, almost silly in that they're so stitched and laced up in one of the wildest environments on the planet. It reminds me a lot of the beginning of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, where they're in the most forbidding jungle in this heavy armor and stiff because they're trying to bring civilization where it does not belong. And there's something on the soundtrack, like the rocks are breathing, like the landscape itself is an organism that's maybe absorbing these characters. She has made her decision for civilization and repression and order and absolute rejection of life and nature, and the girls have got to choose between her and then the wilderness that they go into. It has that hate.
Yeah, I see what he's saying, and I think that really speaks to the emancipatory aspects that Fisher talks about as well.
Fisher contrasts it to M.R. James. Talking about Lovecraft as well, but yeah, there's a sort of classical mode of these weird and eerie tales that is this sort of conservative admonishment to stay within the walls, and then there's this not exactly a rejection. It's not, it's not like they disappeared and it's unambiguously a good thing because we don't know what happened, but there's definitely this ambiguous, at least, idea of enjoyment and like transcendence.
The funny line in the movie and in the book, they start to go into this trance when they go up to Hanging Rock, and it reminds me of Malcop from Garner from an earlier chapter. If you haven't checked it out, go and check out our episode on Neil and Gardner, where just going to this place itself is enough to put you in a hallucinatory state. They see the monolith and then they just fall down and they start to sleep, and they wake up and they say something like, they look down at their friends and they're like, Marion says, "Whatever can those people be doing down there, like a lot of ants? A surprising number of people are without purpose, although it's probable that they are performing some necessary function unknown to themselves." And that speaks to a real eeriness that's within the character's perception of other people, too. That it seems like these rocks allow them to perceive these elevated kind of worldly discourses that they wouldn't get at the school. Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of an annoying friend doing acid for the first time level of revelation. But yes, all those little ants down there are whittling away at their time. But a few things happen that sort of point to a supernatural. Everyone's watch stops at exactly the same time. Seemingly everyone gets this little sleepy spell, which, they're also like hanging out in 90 fucking degree weather in like 6 layers. But, everyone gets this like sleepy spell and wakes up. What time is it? My watch stopped too at the same time as your watch. And then, these girls enter this trance and just are seen wandering off towards the mountain.
Edith runs away.
Yes, Edith, the character who's just bullied by everyone for unclear reasons, doesn't fall under the spell and instead gets freaked out at all these girls going into hypnosis mode.
And dancing and doing some really devilish things like spinning around and getting dizzy for no reason.
Right. And anyway, so these 3 girls...
Free spirits.
And 1 teacher disappear.
Which I was confused when reading the book and also even watching. It's very unclear when she goes to go hunt them down. They never...
The teacher just ends up also going to the rock. She wasn't leaving for the purpose of hunting them down.
Yeah, and that, as Fisher gets into it, there's like gaps which aren't explained throughout this.
Right. Well, Edith first, has amnesia that partially comes back over time. And then, what is it, Irma is the one who reappears?
Yeah, she's found by Mike, who is one of the boys that saw them and holds himself responsible for it. And because he holds himself responsible, he kind of camps out on the rock and then does a little breadcrumb trail. Then he stumbles on Irma.
Right, so she's the only one they find. She also has no memory of anything.
Yep. And then there's like a weird, not exactly a consummated relationship between Mike and Irma, but there's like this story of him being like her hero, and it becomes, you know, to the newspaper clipping thing, it becomes a national news story that this guy, this teenager, found this missing girl and that she's the only one that's found. I just want to hammer on, before we get to 18, that this is where we, in the book, are seen crossing a threshold. There is a threshold that these girls are moving out into and through, and that this threshold, as Fisher says, it is as if Marion is already detached from the world below, as if she has already crossed the threshold. It is after the forest see a monolith, a single outcrop of pockmarked stone, something like a monstrous egg perched above a precipitous drop the plain, that the atmosphere decisively shifts. All four are immediately overcome by lassitude and fall into a deep sleep. The focus now moves to Edith's point of view, and then that's when she runs away. And I think the monolith reminds me of 2001,
Sure.
and it also reminds me of Nigel Nealon as this totem. It's a totem that it's okay. So it's not a totem.
Nigel Neal or Garner?
Garner. I mean that chapter.
Oh, okay, sure.
Where it's totems that have an entrance into the other world, or the spiritual, the transcendent, etc.
Right. There's definitely some strange goings on about this rock formation. Oh, you Edith, no one wants to be your friend. Oh my god, this is why we don't invite you to our birthdays.
Marlowe, as much as you're saying that you don't understand why they were bullying her, you spent the entire movie passively bullying her.
She's got one of them faces. No, I mean, whatever. She's just
you
kind
would
of
have
a
been
drag.
one of the people bullying
She's
her.
a bit of a drag.
She doesn't know about a million.
She is specifically afraid of the concept of a million.
Well, it's a scary concept. I'm with Edith on that. Just try to think about a million of something.
She specifically says, it's on page 26 of the book, I remembered it, but she specifically says she's cool with imagining $1 million, but 1,000,000 years is scary to her.
It's terrifying.
But yeah, no, she's afraid of big things and the big scary world.
Also,
But, yeah.
like, the teacher that brings them is, like, obsessed with the Pythagorean theorem.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, she's the, like, seemingly only teacher who went to school for something that wasn't memorizing shitty early 19th century English poetry. And she's like the math nerd, but the only like math she ever does in the book is the Pythagoras theorem. And she does it in the dumbest fucking way as well, because she's like talking to the stagecoach driver and is like, oh, well, we could just get back, like, you know, that way, because, you know, we went along 2 legs of a triangle, and 2 legs of a triangle are always longer than the third leg. And the dude's like, yeah, there's not a fucking road there. That's not how that's not how overland navigation works. I get what triangles are. Well, actually, to be fair, the guy didn't really get what a triangle was, but he was right ultimately about the Pythagorean theorem is not terribly applicable in your day-to-day life of trying to drive a stagecoach from point A to point B.
That was a funny thing that was early on. That was pretty comical. The other thing about this is there is a very, like, sisterhood of witches about these girls, too.
Yeah, definitely a fucking dancing in the woods with Goody Proctor-ness to the way they kind of all trance out and decide to start shuffling like a weird cult.
So, Fisher talks first about Freud and the interpretation of dreams, dating it in 1900, even though it was written in 1899. And one of the tricks that Joan Lindsey uses to make this seem more believable and more real is by having more specificity, and choosing Valentine's Day 1900 gives it a very wow, this really must have happened because she knows the day.
Mm-hmm.
And then Fisher talks about the story of the painters Zeuxis and Parriccio, referred to by Lacan, but originally written down by Pliny the Elder.
Yeah, Lacan talks about this. Zizek talks about Lacan talking about this.
Yeah, Pliny the Elder is, as you said, a Roman...
Yeah, I believe Roman historian.
Historian, poet. I think he's one of the great lyrical poets.
Mm-hmm.
And his story is Zeuxis and Parriccio, who are competing to see who could produce the most realistic painting. And Zeuxis makes a picture of grapes so realistic that the birds are like, oh my god, I'm so hungry, give me those grapes. And then Parriccio makes a painting of a curtain, and then Zeuxis is like, oh my god, the grapes must be behind the curtain. Oh my god, the curtain's the painting, it's a trick.
Right.
You are the better painter.
Yeah, so to be clear, they were, I guess, specifically trying to paint grapes as their test zone. But
one of the Roman tests of time is to who can be the better painter of grapes.
Well, these are the most Greek names ever, but yeah.
Oh wait, they're Greek?
Yeah, I think it was Greek, but written by Roman. It's a whole fucking thing. It was probably written by a bunch of people, but I think Zeuxis and Parriccio, or however the fuck you pronounce these names, are supposed to be Greek. Yeah, so, I mean, it's this whole idea. Lacan, of course, uses it as, the object petit, the, unreachable desire. Zizek uses it to mean, jouissance, I guess. I mean, it's almost reminiscent of how we discuss the Necronomicon, how we've discussed, the works of Sutter Kane. If you show the thing, that suddenly becomes less real than evidence the thing exists, but not the thing itself, I guess.
Yeah, it's another trick that Joan Lindsey uses to make us think that it's a real picnic.
Anyway, chapter 18, she almost didn't do that. She almost kind of gave her hand away.
And this is something that I think a lot of writers are tempted to do, myself included. I've felt compelled to explain or over-explain what has been written to kind of tie a bow on it when it doesn't need to.
I mean, in television writing, it's called a show bible, is usually a literal document that has, biographies of all the characters on the show, a bunch of shit that will never actually make it to the show, but it's a useful thing when you're writing an episode. You can refer back to, oh, Bobby's mom lives in such and such, and that's going to be consistent from episode to episode, writer to writer, because you have this one, centralized document, says a bunch of things, not all of it comes up into the show, but it's details here and there that you use.
That's more like an encyclopedia of the whole world.
Well, yeah, but Joan Lindsey has an idea of exactly what happened to these girls in her brain. When she writes the other 17 chapters, they are written around assuming this is what happened. Other theories can fit in there, and the audience can bring their own stuff to it. But, she has this idea, and having it even in a concrete form in some way allows her to, then have these details throughout the other chapters that are self-consistent with that idea.
I'm going to read a little bit from this chapter 18, which was published posthumously in, I believe, 1987, called The Secret of Hanging Rock. Basically, they take off their clothes and they try to throw their clothes off the side of the rock, and the corsets just hang in midair. And so this is the description of that. Well, You won't find a wardrobe, Irma said, however hard you look. Where can we put them? Miranda suggested, throwing them over the precipice. Give them to me. Which way did they fall? Marion wanted to know. I was standing right beside you, but I couldn't tell. Then there's other character who is not named in Chapter 18, which is another withheld information, but it's assumed it's the teacher.
Yeah, it's probably supposed to be the math teacher.
She's never named, but she's just sitting there, and she goes, you didn't see them fall because they didn't fall. The precise, croaking voice came at them like a trumpet from the mouth of the clown woman on the rock, now sitting up and looking perfectly comfortable. I think, girl, that if you turn your head to the right and look about level with your waist, they all turned their heads to the right, and there, sure enough, were the corsets, becalmed on the windless air like a fleet of little ships. Miranda had picked up a dead branch long enough to reach them, and was lashed out at the stupid thing seemingly glued to the background of gray air. Let me try, Marion said. Whack, whack. They must be stuck fast in something I can't see. If you want my opinion, croaked the stranger, they're stuck fast in time. Dun dun dun.
Well, anyway, and then after that, they all go into a portal and disappear forever. So that's how they actually disappear.
So, yeah.
Except for Irma. Irma has this, like, sort of Orpheusian looking over her shoulder in doubt, and the portal closes and she doesn't get to go in. But the rest of them all go through this portal. Arguably, possibly also turn to crabs.
Yeah, there is a description where they turn to crabs.
Well, the teacher turns into a crab. I mean, it doesn't exactly explain everything, but it certainly lands on the supernatural and also dispels any pretense that this might have happened in real life.
Yeah, which is sort of the rub from the beginning that draws you in.
The book does have this thing I immediately think of as just the Fargo intro that, like, famously fooled a bunch of people. Fargo came out. But, yeah, just this kind of, you know, this might have happened, offering a lot of, like, meta information and, like, seemingly primary sources. So, yeah, I mean, Fisher doesn't hate Chapter 18. He doesn't necessarily make the argument that the book would be better with it, but he does kind of suggest it gives it this more weird mode.
Well, yeah, it's very much reminds me of the first section of this book. You talk about holes in curtains, you know, with David Lynch, or portals and egresses when it comes to something like H.G. Wells and the door in the wall. Or even like the Tim Powers Anubis Gate, where this worldly time that everyone's entering into, especially with the clock stopping, and then when they're in this, the time stops. That's where the time stopping kind of reminds me of, because it is something that should not be there but is, right? That's the weird. It's something from the outside that's entering, or you're entering into the outside.
I mean, to quote Fisher, the published version of the novel, the one without Chapter 18, not only leaves an enigma without a solution, it also leaves the question to the novel's genre. Does it belong to realism, murder mystery, fantasy, science fiction? The inclusion of 18 would not have settled the question of genre, but it would have illuminated certain possibilities. It would now not seem possible to read the novel as a murder mystery. But Chapter 18 produces as many enigmas as it solves. What is the status of the experiences of the rock? Are they taken literally? Are they understood as a consequence of some state of intoxication, etc.? So,
I want to read that section. This is when she turns into a crab. Quite simple. You are thinking in terms of linear measurements, girl Marion. When I give you the signal, probably a tap on the rock, you may follow me. And the girl Miranda can follow you. Is that clearly understood? The rattled face was radiant. Before anyone could answer, the long-boned torso was flattening itself out on the ground beside the hole, deliberately forming itself to the needs of a creature created to creep and burrow under the earth. The thin arms crossed behind the head, with its bright, staring eyes, became the pincers of a giant crab that inhabits mud-caked billabongs. Slowly the body dragged itself inch by inch through the hole. First the head vanished, then the shoulder blades humped together, the frilled pantaloons, the long black sticks of the legs welded together like a tail ending in two black boots. It's definitely weird.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite elements of the novel were kind of more the metafiction of it all, that element to it, but, yeah. Definitely, it does, as you said, give it a Lynchian aspect. And yeah, you could see, I mean, Lynch would probably love to film the crab transformation and shit. Like,
yeah, he would take the one chapter and turn it into a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
I like this book. I was reading it over the summer, and I was in some arid, really, like the hottest week of the summer, and this book really captures heat and kind of intoxication with the elements of Australian bush. It has this dreamlike quality to its narration style. It expertly moves from perspective to perspective. It's a murder mystery without chapter 18 that's not quite intriguing, but like a lot of mysteries with this type of novel, it brings you into the universe very easily, and it allows you to explore, if not the characters, because the characters really don't have personalities. The characters become part of this environment, and they make you think of the impacts of things like colonialism, or things like the way the land around you is in contrast with the people that are on top of it. And there's a real stain of place, enchantment of the land aspect to this that really pairs well with a breezy summer read.
I mean, it certainly reminds me of, a lot of those, like, Bildungsroman, or whatever the fucking German word for school novel is. But, like kind of a Jane Eyre, pastoral kind of story with a bit of a postmodern twist.
The other thing is that she wrote this, like, in the very late in life, and it was her first novel. And it was very weird in that aspect.
Well, there's, famously, what's her face? Kill a Mockingbird. That was, like, her first novel, and it was super late in life. And last novel, if we ignore the posthumous sequel.
Yeah, she first worked as a painter. She was trained as a painter, and then published her first literary work under a pseudonym in 1936. She was born in 1896.
She was 70 when she wrote this fucking book?
71 years old.
God damn.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
that's very that's very late in life. God damn.
And there's something admirable to that. I mean,
certainly.
I believe her when she said it came to her in a dream, because like her first novel at 71, like that's something. And she died in 1984, so she lived just 88 years old, almost 90 years old, and I think it's a great way to finish this Weird and the Eerie. There's an unsettlingness to this, but at the end, this is really one of the more enjoyable reads, I think, of the season that I went through. I don't know if we want to finish this off with like a recounting of the entire season of what you enjoyed or what you...
I'm glad I read Redshift, even if it wasn't something I enjoyed. It was kind of fun going through Quatermass, Lynch and whatnot. And also I definitely enjoyed revisiting Lovecraft for all his bullshit.
Yeah, I'm glad you introduced me to Lovecraft. I'm happy I got introduced to The Fall properly. That was a good discussion with John. If you want to check out our Patreon episode with John Kenny. We did a great interview, and also with Phil Smith.
Yeah, that was quite good.
Good interviews. I loved Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, Mulholland Drive's great.
Had never seen that before. Jonathan Glazer. Great movies.
Yeah,
great movies from Jonathan Glazer. And, I am glad to have read Margaret Atwood's Surfacing. So that was...
that was actually quite good too.
So yeah, great season. Next season, we will be reading Mark Fisher's
Flatline Constructs, baby.
Flatline Constructs, Season 4, Gothic Materialism and Cybernetic Theory Fiction. So make sure to check that out.
Yeah.
See you then.